Alright guys, today we're going to take a look at why we chose MIG welding with a spool gun over TIG welding for aluminum. Now the obvious factor being, if you already have a MIG welder, it's not a very large expense to go out and buy a spool gun for your welder. The spool gun for our Lincoln Electric 140 welder was $200. Yeah, we ordered it through Home Depot and had it delivered to our house. Now if you happen to have a welder that does everything, it does MIG, it does TIG, it does stick, it does spool. I mean, spool welding might not be your best bet. You can play around and see what works for you. Now if you don't have any welders whatsoever, you can actually pick up a TIG welder fairly cheap. But for us, we already had the MIG, and after watching a couple of videos from professionals, we felt that this was our best option. Let me explain why. Now the first thing you're going to be thinking is that, oh gee, I don't have a 220 outlet plug. That's not a big deal. You can rewire a 220 outlet, but if you're short on time and maybe you're traveling using other people's houses, a 220 welder just is not going to be very practical. So that's one area where a 110 welder would come in handy. Now we are using the 4043. We haven't tried the 5356 wire, and I'm curious to see how that would compare to the 4043. But all things aside, let's stick with what we have right now, the 4043. These are some of the welds Eric's managed to produce with this welder. The 4043 wire. This is thicker gauge aluminum, and we can actually see what the gauge is on this. If you don't have a caliper, it's well worth your investment. They're not very expensive at Harbor Freight. I'm just gonna turn it on. Okay. So, let's see what gauge this is quick here. Now, when you're taking the measurement, you always want to hit it in several different areas and pretty much get the average. That was 3.3. I think for the most part it was 3.3. Here is, this is the original chunk right here. So let's test this one. You can see even on this chunk that the metal has variation to it. Some parts are thicker, some parts are thinner. When you cut it off, you get what's known as a burr on the edge, which is basically the metal kind of curling over. So if you don't take multiple measurements, you're gonna get an inaccurate one. I think we figured on it being 3.3, and that's what we based all of our welding on. Okay, so once you figure out the measurement of your metal, if you don't already know the gauge, you can convert it online using a converter. There's a link right up here. Bloop. Yeah, pretty nifty look. If you're watching on TV, you might not be able to see that link up there, but check it out on your phone or your computer. There's a link right here. And that is the conversion for converting your measurement into gauge. Now, once you get the gauge of your metal, whether it's steel or aluminum, all welders have a handy dandy little chart on here. And here's the aluminum settings. Then you have MIG, and I don't know what that one is. DC minus, I think this is flux core. Nope, this is flux core. So flux core and aluminum actually have the same setup. See how it says DC plus and this says DC plus? That has to do with your little connections down here. One of these is plus and one of these are minus. Minus being ground, plus being positive. Usually your ground goes to ground and your positive plugs in. However, with welding, sometimes you need to create an arc. And that's a burst of electricity, and that's how you get your penetration. So, and this actually tells you what you want to weld with. This says 100% argon, which is what we have right here. And if I remember correctly, this was 13 gauge, which whether it's 12 or 14, it's still the same setting. 6.5, which is wire speed, and D is the temperature on this specific welder. What a lot of other of the professional YouTube sites recommend is starting with the recommended settings and then dialing it down. And that's what we did. You can see that right now we have it on 6. We did start at 6.5. It seemed a little bit too fast for us, so we dialed it down. We could dial it down a little bit further and see what happens. We honestly haven't tried that. So what we're gonna do today is try to find how capable our 110 welder is. Now I know I'm not a professional, and I know my welds look like crap. But chances are most of you are gonna have the same issue. So let's experiment together and see what we can find. So the first bead we're gonna run is just a normal bead on the settings that we currently have. Setting a 6 on D. If you're watching this and you're a subscriber, a couple of you guys had suggested different patterns to run. Now the patterns that we had been running are basically loop-de-loops. Circle, 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 or basically squashed O's. Eric said that it doesn't work very good running a continuous pattern. So we're gonna kind of play around with that and actually see if you can run a continuous pattern with the Lincoln Electric 140 or a 110 volt MIG welder. We're also gonna try a couple different things, such as the smiley face, which is like this, and then the U pattern, like this. So we're gonna try all of those and see if we can get something to work for continuous welding. Okay, before we get started, a couple of things you're going to have to look at. First, you're gonna wanna make sure, if you've been using your spool gun a lot, to clean out the inside. Now the inside of this one had a lot of aluminum spatter in it. So I just took a shop towel, shop rag, and I twirled it up and I just twisted it around on the inside of this, and that knocked all of the aluminum out. The other thing you're gonna wanna do is make sure that your tip is actually clean. So make sure to wipe that off too with just a regular rag. Lastly, here's a tip that I picked up from this video, right up here. If you haven't watched this video yet, go watch it. He's got some great ideas. Now, one of the things he noticed was that if you're having a lot of black soot on your weld, as evidenced by a lot of these, and you know for a fact that you are holding it at the correct angle, chances are pretty good this is the culprit. Now this, if you look inside of it, it has a ceramic ring on the inside, way before the screws. You can see that there's a gap there between where it screws in and where the ceramic ring is. So let's look at this right here. We're just gonna screw this on real quick and I'll show you where it comes. Okay? Alright, so that's screwed on as tight as it will go. So let's just take a look at this. Okay, so as best as I can show you with this camera, there's actually a gap between this and the rubber. I can actually pick it with my fingernail. So the rubber is not coming anywhere near this ceramic coating. So pretty much this ceramic piece right here does absolutely nothing, because remember, the actual screw is like up here in the tip more. So because of that, we are actually going to use his trick. We're going to put some thread tape on the threads and see if that actually helps with our carbon explosion. But let's just do a trial run. Let's do a bead on here without the tape, and then a bead next to it with the tape, and see if there's actually any difference. Okay, first of all, you can clearly see this looks like crap. There's actually quite a bit of spatter on here. There's a lot of black, and the weld was just sitting right on top. Alright, so we're going to show you how to get past that in just a minute. But our primary concern, actually that one looked like it hit the shielding gas pretty good. So let me try one more. Maybe my angle was bad. You can see that the black pattern is still out there. It's still kicking back a lot. So we definitely need to adjust our settings. That's definitely not any sort of a good weld, and it's definitely not penetrating. It's simply just laying it right on top, and you can't have that. Let's see if we can go through and tape this up real quick. So you're gonna take your tape. Okay, so here we go. And pull it nice and tight down the bottom. I think I wrapped that backwards actually. Make sure not to wrap your little holes up here. Alright, we got that screwed on nice and tight, so let's give this another shot. We're just going to weld right over the top, continue our pattern. The weld from here up to here probably maybe it was actually laying down a little bit better and having a little bit better penetration right there than it was, say, down here. But you're still getting the black sootiness. So we did our first test. That didn't really seem to have a huge effect. You can try it on yours at home and see if you have any difference. The next thing we're gonna do is we are going to preheat the metal. Now, a lot of the people on my channel suggested that if you're already welding, the metal is preheating ahead of itself. With that said, the metal here is only 90 degrees. If I'm clocking my welds, they're all only 90 degrees. I just welded this. Shouldn't it be hotter? The answer is actually no. Look at the side, it's actually a little bit warmer out here. Over here, it's a little bit warmer too. So the reason being, like I explained in my last video, aluminum dissipates heat very quickly. It can absorb heat quickly, but then it also loses it quickly. So even if you are welding with the aluminum, it might be heating it up a little bit, but not nearly enough on thick aluminum with a 110 volt welder. 220, probably no problem. But on a 110, you have a lot more issues and a lot more difficulty getting the metal to temperature. So let's do an experiment. So this was our last weld right here. So we're gonna weld right next to it. Scrape this down again a little bit. So we are going to heat that up with our torch. All right, and that catch the camera on fire. So we're gonna go through and heat this up. And we're gonna heat it up first to 200 degrees. I'm actually gonna start right about here. I'm gonna weld this up right here, and then I'm gonna continue on and see if the weld actually does continue to heat as it goes. So right now the temperature actually heated up very quickly. It's at 187, 174 up there. Let me give this a try. All right, so real quick, my battery's about to die. The actual temperature this was heated up to was about 176. It was at 230 when I first turned off the blowtorch, and then it instantly dropped as soon as I started welding it. So I continued on just to see what it would do. You can see it didn't lay down flat, but what else do you notice about this? This is actually a continuous weld. Right here, we've already disproved one myth that Eric told us, was that you can't continuous weld on this welder, because that's proof right there that you can. Now there are certain techniques that you do have to follow. So we're going to get a new battery for this camera and see what else we can find. We're also going to heat the metal back up to 200 degrees or more and see what it looks like next to it. So let's give it a try. Alright, so I played around with a couple of different settings. I added my block of wood. Okay, this is where we left off, and you can see that I had tried continuously welding without pulsing the trigger gun, and it came out really good. This was 225 rough. You can see that it was actually burning through this thick aluminum in several spots. Part of that was because my angle wasn't correct. Being that this is a curved sheet of aluminum, it's very hard to maintain the correct angle as you travel upward. So curiously, there were a couple burn through spots. So then I went through and I did this area. I turned down the heat on the welder. The heat was about 180 to 200 depending on the area. So I turned the heat on the welder down and it seemed to do pretty good. And again, that was still continuously welding. Okay, so here's something curious worth noting. Previously, we thought with aluminum this thick, we had to preheat it. A couple of my subs said that wasn't required, so I figured, heck, why not give it a try? So right here, I didn't preheat any of these. Now, I'm still getting a lot of the soot on the edges, which is kind of interesting. The weld itself looks superior in shine and clarity. And look how it looks like a beautiful polished nickel or something compared to this over here. This just seems a lot more dulled in comparison to this. So this tells me that a lot more of the impurities are being burned away as I'm welding. I kind of like the size of this guy. I don't remember what I was doing on that one. I think I was just doing like little tiny circles maybe. And these look like squished up poops, but I was trying to do smiley faces like this. And honestly, look at that. It's not sticking up like a pile of crap here. So this is where the wire speed is too fast and your heat is not hot enough to compensate. See, look at this. So what I actually went through and did is I turned it down to almost 5.5. Just that little tiny bit really made the difference. So I had to scrub this area down and acetone it. So I'm not sure why I'm still getting the spray spatter. There's still spray spatter over here, obviously. Overall, the welds themselves look a lot better than even the preheated welds over here. And this takes forever. This I was able to do in just a matter of seconds. The other thing I'm gonna point out is that this thing does get upset. With TIG welding, you can only do a little bit at a time, a couple of seconds, and then you gotta let it take a breath. The same thing with the 110. I can hear the power draining on it as I go. And this time, I wanna leave the camera rolling while I go through and MIG weld that. So that way you can hear the power draining from the machine. And it's hard to hear in the helmet, but it was enough that I could tell it was making a difference. Alright guys, I am seriously gonna say right now that MIG welding is freaking amazing. Those of you who are hardcore TIG welders, stick welders, or have never attempted to try aluminum welding on a very cheap welder, you are gonna be very impressed with this result. Look at this. The first one, I think I was trying to do little tiny circles kind of like this right here. It was coming out kind of chunky. I think I was going too fast. So here I slowed it down and I started doing the U's. And while my U's are quite large, you have to remember that I'm going to be pulling from 2 areas up there. So they do have to be a little bit larger to make sure that I do get penetration on both sides. Again, you might get a totally different result using different wire. This is 40-43. And again, here are the settings that I had it on. 5.5 highest power. And this is 13 gauge aluminum. So with that said, I highly encourage you guys that if you're looking at a cheap alternative to welding, aluminum, and you might not be doing it a whole heck of a lot of the time, this is a great way to go. I don't know what else you can use your spool gun for. Maybe you can use it for stainless steel, I don't know. But man, this is exciting. This is really exciting. Plus it was fast. It was so fast. It's definitely giving me a fit now. And in this video right up here, he will tell you that every time he touches the MIG gun, it gives him a totally different result. Every time he picks it up to use it, you can change absolutely nothing and it will be totally different. That is probably the biggest downside of it. There's a little groove in this wheel right here, and that's where the wire is supposed to ride. Unfortunately, it kind of jumped below that groove and is now below that whole wheel. Because the unit sits so tight, you can't exactly pop it back into place, so I actually cut the wire there. I'm gonna pull it through the tip and then refeed it. Yeah, it sucks because you're wasting wire. Better wasting wire than damaging internal components. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any other comments, besides telling me that my welds look like crap, which again, they probably do because I am a newbie, put your comments down below. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Not that I do a whole lot of welding, but you really don't know what I'm gonna do out here because this is farm life. So, this is WTFarm Girl saying, go out and try something new.